Welcome to another powerful installment of the Katrina Chronicles, our continuing series marking the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Today, we're privileged to speak with Pat Sullivan, Fire Chief of Harrison County, Mississippi. Back in 2005, when Katrina roared ashore, Chief Sullivan was leading the fire department in Gulfport, a city squarely in the storm's path along the Mississippi coast. In this episode, he takes us back to those harrowing days, the tense lead up to landfall, the unprecedented challenges faced by first responders, and the deeply human moments that emerged amid the chaos. Through his first-hand accounts, Chief Sullivan paints a vivid picture of the courage, determination, and resilience that defined their response. His heartfelt reflections shine a light on the tireless efforts it took to safeguard lives and begin the long road to recovery, honoring the spirit of the community forever changed. Welcome to Weather Heroes.
Today we're very lucky to be joined by Pat Sullivan. And Pat, currently you are the fire chief of Harrison County, Mississippi.
Yes, sir. Harrison County Fire Rescue. Yes, sir.
And as you know, Weather Heroes are doing this thing, we're calling it our Katrina Chronicles, since this is the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, the largest storm ever hit the U.S. You were one of the key folks on the ground in Mississippi when that hurricane was heading towards you, and then afterwards when you're doing all your response. So what did you guys have in mind as you're looking at that storm? And what were the thoughts going through?
Yeah, well, let me start with this.
Sure.
I hate the title, the hero thing, and the hero thing is just, I understand why we use it, but I'm very cautious of it because I don't consider myself a hero. I consider myself on the boots kind of guy, a person that is trying to help others. And hero is something that's thrown around nowadays pretty liberally, and I think each individual has to decide who is their heroes, and it's something that you've got to earn. Somebody can't just put a title on you. I don't think so. Anyways, but I appreciate it. And yes, sir, I was the fire chief for Gulfport Fire Department at the time of Katrina. It was before I left Gulfport and came out to the county. I had joined the fire department Gulfport in 1975 as a recruit, and worked my way through the ranks, and was fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to end up to be a fire chief when Katrina struck. So yeah, I was there during the beginning of it and to the end of it, if you will.
So as Hurricane Katrina, you're in your role as fire chief down in Gulfport. You're right in the dead center almost of this thing. Hurricane Katrina is out there, and it's forming, and there's all these news flashes, and I know y'all had to make decisions on who is going to, I guess you're probably trying to get everyone out of their houses based on who had to evacuate and such. What were some of the concerns as y'all were planning on the ground?
Yeah, let me say this. Let's even digress a little bit.
Yeah.
The interesting thing was in my career, I've done everything in the fire services as career guys do. I've been in the dive rescue business. I've been in the hazmat business. I've been in the arson investigation business. I've been all the different things. But I was also one of the first paramedics that we had in the city of Gulfport, and that's back when I came on. That was pre-paramedic stuff, and it was just getting into the vogue and so forth, so on. But so anyways, I was a paramedic. And the reason I say that is because I was actually at an EMS conference in New Orleans. It was one of the large national, international conferences. So we were there in New Orleans and probably not watching it as close because initially when the storm was forecast, it was forecast, if you remember, towards the western side of Florida. Yeah. Apalachicola in the edge in the corner there, that it was going to come in there. And so it was predicted there at first, but having been through a number of storms and been through a number of these events, we all know to not let your guard down. You watch it and you say, we've all been in that position of saying, man, I really feel for Florida. I hate it for Florida. I don't want them to get it, but I'm not interested in us getting it. So, and we all do that. It's just a joke amongst everybody to say, we hate it for you, but we'd rather you instead of us, kind of thing, kind of jokingly. We all face that threat, and we know that, and we're prepared for it. And this storm initially was not bullseye for us. It was for Florida, and we were ready to help them, prepared to go help our brothers over there and do whatever we could. But as the reports kept coming out, each report seemed to send it a little more to the west.
Mm-hmm.
So we started watching it fairly closely when they started saying Pensacola, and that was getting way too close. Well, it didn't slow down as it moved. It didn't slow down coming west until it got towards us over here and towards Louisiana. Then it started making that turn that they said, no, you guys are now really going to be in the bullseye. Having been through enough of them, we knew that we needed to start meeting and ramping up, and that's what we did. We started having our city meetings and our pre-storm stuff. We started getting the word out and telling people, watch the hurricane center's alerts, watch the local medias, watch the EMA office. We're getting concerned about this one. It could be something that's going to affect us. As we do that, and as we normally do, and all doing the things that we try to do to keep our citizens safe and educated and aware. We're doing that internally. We're getting our equipment prepared. We're getting our stations picked up and checking. And we're also doing the normal things of, okay, let's start taking pictures of our stations. So if we do get hit and we have damage, we'll have something to go back and show that this was pre and post damage. So we're doing all this. Well, the one thing that was a little bit different on this one was that Robert Latham was the EMA director for the state, MEMA, Mississippi EMA. He was the director, and Robert, very, very good guy, very great guy. He was very into making sure that citizens of the state of Mississippi were prepared and knowledge. And he actually physically came down here, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him coming to one of our meetings, and one of the large meetings that we were having for the countywide, and he said, y'all need to be prepared for this. And being who we were, having been around the block, thinking we knew what we knew, we were all, Mr. Latham, we are prepared. We've been through storms. We know what storms are. We're prepared. He said, no, you probably haven't seen one like this in a while.
Yeah.
Now, I went through Camille, and as a kid, I remember Camille very, very, very well. And so, like, I've seen them all, and I'm like, well, is it going to be worse than Camille? He said, this is going to be worse than anybody's seen in a long, long, long time. Okay. All right. And so I think we listened to him,
mm-hmm.
but I don't think we heard him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was one of those things that you think you know what you're talking about, mm-hmm. and you think somebody else knows what they're talking about, but you don't know until you go through it. And then subsequently, it proved to be the fact that storm was much greater than we anticipated that it could be. And so the pre thing, and one of the other things that's very that we learned, and I've learned over time, is you can get storm prep fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize that once you start preparing for a storm, and you got a storm coming, especially if it's taken a while to get here, it's going to wear on you. You're doing all these things, and you're getting prepared. And if you're a department head, you're worried about a gazillion things. You're trying to manage a lot of stuff, and you're not going to get much sleep. You're not going to get much rest. Mm-hmm. You may go home and lay your head down, but you're going to be thinking about it, and you're going to be up before you even blink twice and really get any good sleep. So that's something that's a danger that on all these storms is that you can get fatigue. So you go into the storm already facing a lot of physical challenges. You're mm-hmm. probably not eating correctly and just not getting the rest and to be at your optimal. And so we went into the storm being prepared, thinking we were prepared, but having already been up for many hours preparing for it, watching it.
Yeah. That's very typical in the business I used to be in. That sounds very familiar. Watching it, and then it's always great when it doesn't hit. But so you mentioned Camille, and what a lot of people don't know is Camille was at 69, I guess.
Yes.
One of the few Category 5s to ever actually hit the United States. I think Katrina ended up being downgraded down to about a 3. That just shows you that no matter what the category, you got to be careful.
Absolutely. You also have to remember this is that a category 5 is pushing a surge in front of it.
Right.
And just because a category 5 downgrades to a category 4 or whatever it does, it's still pushing a wall of water in front of it.
Yeah.
And so, we've all learned. No, I don't think there's anybody on the coastal regions that will deny that you hide from the wind and you run from the water because the water will kill more people than the wind will kill.
Oh yeah.
It's a proven fact. And so anytime you get Mother Nature pushing that kind of wind speed, but those kind of water forces, absolutely devastating.
You guys were there. You know at this point this giant hurricane's coming. What type of, I guess, preparatory items are you guys doing in the fire department? I know there's a police department. They're out there doing their thing as well. Other areas are out. I know EMA is talking to FEMA.
No, it's absolutely everybody's talking to everybody. Everything's being done. There's no stones being left unturned. You think at that particular moment, what have we done? Have we checked all the boxes of what we have done?
Right.
And have we missed anything? What are we missing that we should be doing and haven't done or haven't had time to do? And of course, the EMA is doing their thing. And each agency's doing their own thing.
Right.
But they're not doing just their own thing. They're coordinating with everybody else, and we're piggybacking. And what are you doing? Okay, what are you doing? Have you done this? Yeah, we got that done, but we hadn't done this. Hey, what about this? So all of that's going on. All of these discussions are being had internally. All of you're looking at staffing. Are you going to go to double staffing? How are we going to get people in? Are people going to come in before landfall? How long before landfall do we want the next shift in to make sure that how are we going to be able to get people off so they can get home to take care? Are we going to have who's not going to be able to get here?
Yeah.
What do the stations look like as far as are any of them in a flood zone? Do we need to be moving trucks out to areas that we're going to have to leave some large swaths of areas unmanned, uncovered, knowing that we can't get trucks in there, but we have to make those decisions that we have to make. So all of that's being looked at. If you're smart, you've done a lot of that before the time that you got a named storm in the Gulf. But here's one of the big things about that is each named storm in the Gulf is going to be a different animal. A zebra is not necessarily a zebra, and a giraffe is not necessarily a giraffe because it could be a baby giraffe.
Yeah.
It could be a baby alligator, or a crocodile. It's not going to eat much. It may be a crocodile that just ate a buffalo and it's not hungry. You don't know. Depending on, and what I mean by that is depending on the size of the storm, depending on how much it's going to push water, which direction is it going to hit the coast from?
Yes.
If it hits this direction, it's going to do this. If it hits that direction, it's going to do that. Is it going to be a daylight storm? Is it going to be a nighttime storm? Each storm is its own body and it has its own history and its own threats. And so you can say a hurricane's a hurricane is not necessarily true. Each one of them has their own particular thing. And so you have to look at these things and you have to look internally at your department and say, how's it going to impact us and what are we going to do? Now, here's the other thing. In our business, as everybody knows that's in the first responder business, is we depend greatly on mutual aid.
Yeah.
Mutual aid is something that we depend on every day. If I have a huge fire and I have more fire than I have resources, I'm calling in mutual aid. I'm calling my neighbor. Hey, can you send me 2 more trucks? Can you send me manpower? Can you send me this? Can you send me? Absolutely. They're sending it because we'll do the same for them. Hey, Chief, we got this. We got you covered. So mutual aid is so vitally important. When you have a storm that covers miles and miles and miles, covers counties after counties, covers from state line to state line, it's going to impact 2, 3 different states. There's no mutual aid that can come in that particular manner, in that time frame. It all has to come outside the region.
Okay.
And so it takes time to get here. And you have to make those requests, and hopefully you've had some agreements with other communities prior to this, and all that's in place. But you can't do it too soon. If you bring these resources too soon, they're impacted negatively and can't get to you. If you wait too long, they can't get to you because there's so much damage and destruction. So it's a fine line. So
Yeah.
all of that's being assessed and being worked on as you're preparing for this storm.
So now Katrina has hit, and obviously very unusual storm, some of the biggest surge recorded. What type of challenges were you guys worried about initially, right after you're getting reports in about what's going on, and were any of those challenges directly for the Gulfport police or Gulfport fire?
Oh, it was for Gulfport. You name an agency. I don't care what. If you want to talk about garbage collection, it impacted it. It's just
Right.
Here's the deal. Gulfport, Mississippi sits on the Gulf of Mexico. You park on Highway 90, take your shoes off, cross the sand, and you're in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
Well, you're in the Sound, but it's connected to the Gulf of Mexico. So the water and Gulfport are intertwined with one another.
Mhm.
When you push 15, 20, 30 foot of water up the beach, you're bound to have destruction and devastation.
Right.
And what it did for Highway 90, which is the coastal road, runs directly in front of us,
Mhm.
is it took it away. There were major parts of Highway 90 that no longer existed. It inundated the beach area to the point where we had water lines that were up out of the ground. And that's from the surge and what it pulled up. And all of the homes on the beach that were washed away from the beach, they were not there. They were slabs.
Yeah.
These homes ended up on 2nd Street, the street that runs parallel to Highway 90 up from there. And we were inundated by the winds and the water. And so the deal is this: there was anything that as much as you thought you were prepared, you're
Mhm.
never prepared for something that's that huge.
Yeah.
No community, no agency can take that kind of devastation and not have it negatively impact the citizens and them. So here's the deal. The storm came in, and as every agency will tell you, first and foremost, and I don't care how you paint it, first and foremost, you've got to take care of your personnel and your equipment.
Right.
Because if you don't take care of your personnel and your equipment, you can't take care of the public. Our job is to save the public, and our job is to save property. But if we're not there to do that, then they are left on their own, and then we have not done anything. So we've got to take care of our firefighters, our police officers, our medics, our nurses, our doctors. And so, there reaches a point when we say, we're not coming out. And we tell people, every storm, we tell people there's going to reach a point when the winds reach this high that I'm not allowing my personnel to leave the fire station because they're in jeopardy of number one, being hurt themselves and losing that equipment.
Yeah.
And I'm not a good leader if I'm risking everything in that position. So that's not going to happen. Every fire chief, police chief, ambulance chief out there is going to tell you, we've got to take care of our people so that they can take care of you. And that's what happened. We got to the point where we could not respond outside of the station. I tried. There was a time when I went out when I knew better.
Yeah.
But as the chief of the department, I said, you know what? This call's coming in. There's people trapped. There's kids trapped. There's this. There's that. And I allowed that monster to pull me out of the station and say, maybe I can get to him. Maybe I can do something.
Yeah.
Let me go and let me just see what the conditions are. Maybe there absolutely was the wrong decision, was dangerous. And I was lucky to make it back to the station safely with my vehicle. And I learned a large lesson there, which was I knew what the right thing to do was, and I chanced it, and I shouldn't have, and I got away with it. The Lord let me live through that. And I said, I'm not going to make that mistake again.
Right.
And didn't.
Right.
But the conditions were such that we could not get out of the station without destroying our equipment and our personnel. And so we hunkered down and we did what we did. We got trucks into safe places when we knew that they were not in safe places, and we put personnel in places that we knew they would be safe. And it was even with that, we had stations that we were concerned if we were going to lose the roof. The
Yeah.
roofs were going up and down on them. We knew they were being damaged. We knew that we were in danger. We didn't anticipate the wind being that strong and that station would be battered that badly. They survived, but it
Right.
was close. And we were in the situation that we were getting people show up at our fire stations that had nowhere else to go, and we had one man that showed up at the fire station that had been cut with flying glass and was in a life-threatening condition, and had he not made it to that fire station with those paramedics in there, he would have been dead. But they were able to keep him alive until we could get resources to him to get him to a higher medical authority. But he lived specifically because we had trained personnel in those stations.
Right.
But that was an everyday thing. That was one of those things that we faced left and right. And the other thing we did a lot of was the dispatchers could, while the communications was going on, dispatchers were able to take calls for help and tell the people, you're on the list.
Right.
As soon as it gets down to the point where we can get our trucks out on and get our people out, if that means walking or driving or cutting our way through the fallen debris, we were going to come check on you.
Yeah.
And we took those numbers and those names and those addresses, and we did after the storm.
Yeah.
We went back out there and tried to find those people. Immediately, storm after a point there, you just hunker down and you make sure that all of you've done your homework. You make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to do and should do, and then you ride the storm out. And after the storm, as soon as you can get out into the community, then you're out there trying to assess, trying to aid.
Right.
And I can remember distinctly one of the things that sticks in my mind was I got communications on by satellite or something. I got communications, whatever it was, the word that the state was saying, "Hey, Chief, what do you need?" And my words were, "I don't know, but whatever you're sending is not going to be enough."
Yeah.
And they specifically, it was to the rescue. What rescue assets do you need? And I said, I don't know what you're sending. I don't even know what I need, but I can tell you whatever you're sending, you better double it, triple it, because this is the worst of the worst. The community was, as a fire chief, I'm all over the city.
Right.
Every day. I pulled out of the station and went to some areas that I couldn't recognize, that it was so that the homes were gone. We ended up in the long and short of it is we ended up in some areas that we had to paint the name of the street on the asphalt because there was nothing around to identify what that street was, what that road was.
Oh yeah.
All those homes had been demolished, had been gone, washed away. And in that kind of environment, it was just so overwhelming. But the training and the instinct sets in and it says, okay, we got a job to do and we're going about to do it. What resources do we have? What has survived? What needs to be done? What's our plan? Let's get to work.
So now some of those initial hurricane challenges I know almost everyone faces, such as cell phone coverage, getting communications in general, lack of water, lack of food, things like that. A lot of MREs were probably being eaten. What did that look like for you guys initially? What challenges beyond some of those that you've already talked about? Some more mundane ones, I guess, but still necessary.
Well, here's the bottom line. We had nothing. It's easy when you have nothing, you got to have everything. And so you start saying, well, I have no communications. Well, let's try to figure out how we're going to communicate. We have runners. We have people running back and forth from here to there. We have no electricity. Well, let's make sure our generators, let's get more generators in. How do we feed people? Hey, listen, guess what? My refrigerator, my freezer is stocked to the brim with deer and alligator and who knows whatever got in my freezer, that we have it in there. Well, guess what's going to happen? All of that stuff is going to come out and we're going to start cooking it because it's going to ruin if we don't. And so you had some hell of a block parties where people would come out, the community would come out, and they'd be cooking food, but here was the deal. We had no way to cook some food. So one of the things was, one of the funny stories was we ended up finding somebody's commercial barbecue truck, or not truck, but it was the setup for
Yeah.
barbecuing, was underneath the debris and was covered and all this stuff, and we were able to dig it out and bring it out and set it up and start cooking on it
Hmm.
because we found it and were able to make it work
Yeah.
and then put it at the fire station, and we were able to cook for the firefighters and for the administration and for people. And the
Okay.
funny story there was several months later, the guy that owned it came up and saw it, and he said, I wondered what happened to that thing. He said, I thought it was washed away. He said he was just
Yeah.
as happy that we were able to get it out of there and use it,
Yeah.
and just thrilled with that. But you know, you do what you got to do under those circumstances,
Yeah.
and got to be resourceful, and you have to take those kind of things. Talking about no water, we had. I remember talking that we had some task force come down of some tenders,
Mhm.
some tankers, tenders. We call them tenders
Yeah.
under the FEMA designation. We had these tenders, water trucks, that got assigned to us, and it was funny because I remember them calling, talking to us at one point and saying, "We got assigned to come down to Gulfport, Mississippi, and we didn't know where Gulfport, Mississippi. They were from Oklahoma,
Mm.
and they said we got assigned to come down, and we thought we were going to go to New Orleans, and we were disappointed, and we were really mad because we didn't get to go to New Orleans. We ended up in Gulfport, Mississippi, and they said it was the best thing that ever happened to us because you guys fought so much fire and you needed so many tenders and so much help, and
Mm.
we realized that God maybe sent us the right place because we were able to do so much, and we're so thankful for we got to help that community. And it's just little things like that, and the friends you make when that happens. And there was another story I tell about people coming in to help us, and you asked about what kind of help did we get. DeKalb County, Georgia, sent in a crew, and I can tell you this: this is how this worked. Sleep deprived, stressed, don't know trying to figure out how my guys are going to get to eat, trying to figure out how we're going to do anything, and just doing all this stuff. But then the 50 or 60 guys show up, and it's like, really, 50 or 60 guys? Now what do I do with them? How do I feed them? How do I get them fuel? How do I do this? How do I do that? It was more stress than I needed and wanted. And it turned out that those guys, being firefighters, being in the brotherhood of the fire service, they were not dummies.
Mhm.
They came prepared. They knew what they were doing. They came in, and what they actually did was they divided the crews up, and they would do one day a crew would be on our fire trucks helping us. They would man fire trucks for us. The next day they would be with another agency. I found out they would be out there at maybe the coroner's office helping the coroner's office. And the third day they'd have a rest day. Well, what I found out later is that on that third day off, those guys that were off, they weren't off. They were going to firefighters' homes and helping. They were doing what they could for the firefighters that lost stuff.
Yeah.
And it just still today chokes me up.
Yeah.
They were taking care of us.
Yes.
As we were facing what we were facing. And you never forget stuff like that.
No.
But having those guys having been trained and being professionals and understanding what the need was, they were there. And Mississippi Power was another one. Mississippi Power Company,
Yeah.
They did the same thing. My wife's dad retired from there, and they were older, and they got 12 foot of water in their home, and it was destroyed. And my wife was so distraught because she didn't know what to do. I was tied up doing this. And she said they pulled up one day, a bunch of them pulled up and said, "We're here. What can we do for you?" That's the kind of stuff that means something.
It does.
And, you can't, you almost can't train. You can't write that down in a policy. That's where you're trained to respond to emergencies and resiliency. And your department, when you train to do the right thing with the right people,
Yeah.
and then you bring that to the game, to the fight, those are heroes.
Yeah.
Those guys didn't have to come here. This wasn't their community. They didn't have to come help us,
Yeah.
but they left their families to come to do. Those are the heroes. Those are the guys that you will always remember them and always be thankful for that community that allowed them to come and allowed them to help us. And so, those kind of things were what made us be able to survive that storm. And then, you go back, you talk about the individual firefighters, the stuff that they and police officers, the stuff that they that they suffered through. We had to send people out trying to find our people to see if they were okay, and they couldn't get to work because they couldn't get out of their homes. The trees were all down on their homes. And one firefighter told me, it was funny. Another sidebar of that story about my experience with the cab. The chief came to me one time and he said, "Hey, chief, I got to apologize for my guys." And I said, "Oh man, what is it?" I'm thinking, did he, being fireman, you just never know who did he, who did he upset or who did he say something to? And he said, "Well, he said, my guys showed up on one of your trucks and they were in blue jeans. They were supposed to be in uniform and they didn't wash their uniform and they showed them, but we won't let that happen again." And I'm laughing because I had guys that didn't have any clothes and they were showing up in shorts and t-shirt riding fire trucks,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
worried
yeah.
about that. It was like, "Chief, it's okay.
Yeah,
we,
yeah, yeah.
we can deal with it." But that's the kind of professionalism that they brought to the table. And it was funny because when it was over with and they were timed for them to demob, we gave them an escort with all of our trucks out of town.
Well deserved.
Yeah, it really was. So, we fought through those things, and, and the community bonded together and they did anything they could to help one another. And when your community is strong, and that's what's got to be, I don't care if you're black, white, or brown, or whatever your situation is, it's human beings, and you take care of one another. And you make a strong community. And back in the day, if you think about this, our forefathers, this country was able to develop the way it was able to develop was because communities came together and they bonded together against the elements, against the wildlife. The bear wasn't going to eat a community that everybody stood together and kept the bear off of them.
Yeah,
And,
for sure.
That's the way it has to be today. You have to be ready to defend against the bear.
Yeah.
When the bear wants to eat your family, you protect your family. When the bear wants to eat your community, you protect, and all the community comes together and protects your community from that bear. And if that bear is a tornado, if that bear is a fire, if that bear is a hurricane, you've got to be prepared for it and be fighting it. And so we learned so much on those individually helping each individual and what they needed and what we could do. And then working with the other communities that are coming in to help you, we learned so much about what worked and what didn't work.
Sure.
We always talk about freelancing, in our business. Freelancing is bad. People just showing up and saying we want to help, that's one thing. And we understand that. But the last thing you need is disorganization.
Yeah.
You got to make organization out of the chaos. If you don't, then you're going to just have more chaos. Working with the volunteer agencies, they've gotten very good. The NGOs have gotten very good about controlling that and knowing how to organize volunteers. And your community has to embrace that and say, okay, we want to work with these volunteer groups that want to work with us, but we've got to organize it, make it work for all of us.
So here you are, all your department, probably every one of you guys, all of you are impacted by Katrina. So you're having to work on your own home. Luckily for those firefighters from DeKalb County coming in to help, and others and with good graces. But you're multitasking, fixing your own home, worrying what's going on there, dealing with that, as well as trying to basically get out there and handle Gulfport and beyond. Probably you guys got pulled in a lot of different directions. What was that like? It had to be very stressful.
Well, I'll give you an example. Firemen and policemen and medics, they don't quit. And there was times when I'd have to make them, I'd say, enough's enough. You've been riding the truck for a week now. Stop, take off, go home. And I had one firefighter tell me, and this brought it to light to me. One thing is he said, "Chief," he said, "I would love to." He said, "But you know what? most of my family had lost their homes. And he said, this is what he told me. He said, I've got 21 people living in my house because my house was not damaged. He said, I've got people sleeping on the hoods of cars. He said, this is my quiet zone. This is my safe zone. This is where I can unwind from that chaos at the house. He said, I'm good. I'm good. If you let me stay, he said, I'll not even make a call. I'll just stay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the other funny thing that happened, and that wasn't unusual. That was not unusual at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing that happened that I thought was really unusual and funny, kind of somewhat, is we were all stressed and we had all kind of stuff going on, and it was but I had them come to me and they said, "Hey, Chief, we need an area to set up some stuff for some guys that are coming in to help us, some people coming in to help us." I said, "What do you mean they're coming in to help us? They're helping us. They're helping the firefighters." So, okay, give me some specifics. What are they doing for the firefighters? They're here to give massages. They're here to give massages. Now, what are you talking about? And he says, they're therapeutic massagist. Come in and they do therapy through massages, and that helps people with stress and this and that. And I said, you know what? We're not in Kansas any longer, Toto. This is totally beyond. We've never had this kind of. You don't build that into your plan.
No.
Bring in the massage therapist.
Yeah.
But it works.
Mm-hmm.
And the stresses that everybody was facing was just. In the fire service, well, let me say this, in public service and in the military, we all know the dangers, and let's be honest, we all know the dangers of suicide.
Yeah.
We know the losses that we've all faced and that we've seen, and we do everything we can to prevent that. But I think maybe even back 20 years ago, we didn't even understand it as what we understand today. And that was a danger there, but we knew people were stressed, and we tried to do everything we could to help that, to make sure that wasn't the thing. You survive something like this, and then a tragedy like that happens. And so we were willing to do things that when people came in and said, "Hey, I got this crazy idea, but we think it might help."
Right.
We're open. We'll listen.
Yeah.
We'll listen.
Very good. Very good.
And today we're much more aware of that and understand the dangers of that. And we can't ever forget that. And that's something that has to be built into there.
Right.
And so, the firefighters that lost their homes, it was hard for them to walk away from being on the job and to walk away from their home. They were conflicted on both sides of, I've got a job to do, but I've got to take care of my family. I got to get them. And as management and as people that were responsible for taking care of them, it was very important for us to help them get a handle on that and do as much as they could do. Context of, you take care of your family first, and we'll get some help in here to help us, and then you get back to us. And that was just something you got to into your system. You got to understand that has got to happen.
Yeah, for sure. So, what do you think as you look back, were some of the big wins you had after Katrina had gone over? You started assessing and you started laying out some plans based on some of these challenges that, frankly, no one had ever had before. I mean, if you look at Camille, more of a wind event, and that was really the number one event to look at for something like this. But now it's so different scenario.
I think that my takeaways today would be to tell people is have a realistic plan. One of the things that when they ask me, and I've gone to some communities and spoke on this and done this, and they said, "Well, how can we prepare?" I said, "Well, the first thing you do is you plan. You put a plan together, and then you test that plan. You've got to test the plan. And then when you test the plan, be realistic on it. Don't say, okay, we're going to have a disaster drill, and it's going to take us 15 minutes to do the disaster drill, and we're going to pretend this, and we're going to pretend that." You're not doing yourself any favors. You're not doing your community any favors. You can play that game all day long. I can play it with the best of them. Yeah. I can paper disaster it all day long. The reality of it, though, is here's what you do. You go in and you get a scenario. You get outside people to come in and say, test us. Really test us. Don't test yourself. That's an open book test if you're testing yourself. You get somebody to come in and you test you, and you put me under the pressure that I need to be put on. And then what you do is you turn the computers off. You turn the cell phones off. You operate in an environment where you don't have those things, or you only have one, but you've got 15 people that need it.
Right.
And that's the only way you can communicate. That's the only thing. And then you see how that works. And then you'll know your community if you guys are, if that plan is realistic and you build in realistic problems, you know, you build in problems that you know you would face, that you don't have an answer for, but you got to come up with an answer. So that's very important. You partner up with sister communities.
Mm-hmm.
You say, I'm going to get with Topeka, Kansas, and say, if we have a storm and we have this thing and it's terrible, could we depend on you to be our sister and maybe take over some things? Like it's something simple, like say, okay, they have a list of all of our employees and their phone numbers, and we give our employees a phone number to contact in Topeka, Kansas, where we know they're not going to be affected by any storm here,
Yeah.
and that you can check in with Topeka and they can be checking off the list. And they're also going down that list trying to make contact and say, okay, Gulfport, we've found this many people and we've had this many people reach out and say they're now in this place and there, but they're safe.
Yeah.
Something like that, a virtual command post somewhere else, maybe. That's just a thought, this is something that when you're inundated and all. I'll give you another prime example. Let's say it is Topeka, Kansas, okay? Just throwing a name out there. If Topeka, Kansas hadn't heard from me in 12 hours, they start doing this because they know it's a fail-safe. I can't communicate, so automatically, if they hadn't heard from me in 24 hours, in 72 hours, they're sending people and they're sending equipment. They've already said they would do that because they hadn't heard from me. Now, I can cut it off at any time, but if I'm in desperate need, guess what? I know Topeka, Kansas is coming.
Right, right.
And so that's a outside of the box thinking. And you've got to think like that in your communities of what can I do differently that's going to make a difference. Networking. If you aren't talking to other people, if you don't know on first name basis the people in your EMA emergency management organizations above you and above them, then you got a problem. You need to know who you can call. How do firemen and policemen get things done? Hey, I know somebody, I'm going to call somebody. And that somebody knows somebody and they call somebody. That's how you get things done. And is it going through the official channels? It may not be going through the official channels. But in reality it's a channel and it gets things to where you need to be doing. But you got to think about that. The old thing that, and you may have heard this, somebody may not have heard it. If you're handing out business cards at a disaster, it's a disaster. You have better already had your key people that you know in other places. You have better have their phone number in your Rolodex and in your phone. And I mean Rolodex because if your phone doesn't work, that Rolodex may be the next best thing.
Yeah. We find after some of these bigger storms, as great as technology is, sometimes it's just not working or working to the way it needs to
Absolutely
fully support our goals. So you talked about the communications, just kind of going back to in our conversation a little bit. You had mentioned runners, and I kind of want people to kind of get an idea of the challenges y'all face with communications, such that you were sending runners, just like the days of war, the Roman army sending runners between the generals,
It absolutely was. And you think about it, let's say I don't have communications, but be honest. I've got most fire departments are working out in the field and they're working separate than the EA or the central command of your community. Your emergency management is in a building somewhere, and that's how they operate. That's their stock and trade is phones, computers, and being able to do that, right? So if I can't call them and have the discussion with them, then I need to be having a runner go up there. I want you to go run up there and tell them that we got 3 fire stations that are no longer available for response, and that 2 of the fire stations, we didn't get the fire truck out of them, and I need more fire trucks, and I need this, and I need that. It's just a simple matter. Now, what does he do with it if you don't have communications? You're going to put somebody in a vehicle, and they're going to go to the state capitol wherever the state is located, and they're going to be saying, this is what the situation is right now. Like 3 hours ago when I left, this is what it was.
Yeah.
That may sound like is crazy, but Why wouldn't you do that? That communications has got to happen. Now, the technology with satellite phones, sometimes we are so cheap we kill ourselves.
Hmm.
Oh, and I don't want to spend any money on satellite phones. I don't want to rent a satellite phone because it's going to cost me some money. Well, but it's also going to cost you a lot more if you don't have that means of communicating and getting the things your community needs.
Yeah.
If you want to save some dimes for some dollar bills.
Yep.
And we're all listen, right now this country is going through a reevaluation of FEMA,
Yeah.
right? No question about it. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I think right now that it's probably not a bad thing of going back in and looking at anything. I mean, even your car, you take it in for an exam and you open the hood and you look
Hmm.
at it. Is the coil working right? Is the, spark plug? You do an exam. Maybe it's time that we look at that. What is FEMA going to look like on the other end of this exam? I have no idea. I'm hoping that we're going to find some things that could be corrected and should be corrected, and they get corrected. And I'm hoping that they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and keep the things that are working
Yeah.
and do it. And here's what one of the things that I think is that what I saw is that some of the people that they put on this committee have been on the ground in the local communities and the state communities and have been there from that perspective and are advising the federal government of here's what we faced and here's what we would have wished would done different or what should be done different. And then they all get together and come up with a thing and said, yeah, we're hearing you now.
Hmm.
We got both ears open and you're telling us we're listening to you. So yeah, is that a bad thing? Absolutely not a bad thing. Every that we have, they probably, if you're smart, as you sit down and even with your wife, no matter how long you've been married or your girlfriend, you need to sometimes take stock and say, let's just sit down and talk and let's go to dinner and let all the craziness around us get away and let's just be us and communicate a little bit.
Hmm.
And I think that's the same thing you need to do in your organizations. Every fire department and police department, sometimes we get so busy we forget to sit down and say, hey, let's just go out and talk to the guys and sit around the table and say, what's going on, guys? What are we doing right and what are we not doing right?
Hmm. Very good.
So that's something, but being prepared and trying to make sure our community understands. Here, I'll give you a perfect example. Florida to me is a perfect example.
Hmm.
Their building codes. Every community should look at Florida's building codes and see how they change their building codes and what some of that you can go into communities in Florida and the building codes absolutely kept homes from falling down or from being destroyed.
Yeah.
I saw myself when I did a deployment on Ida to Grand Isle to in Louisiana, and that community was destroyed. And there were some homes that I'm like, how did that home survive this?
Hmm.
And they said it was built to the Florida standards, and that home was standing, and five others around it were on the ground. That's got to tell you something. We've got to learn that. And we've got to bring that back to our communities and say, yeah, will it cost us some more money? Absolutely. But will our community be better off because it? Absolutely. Will your home be where you can get back in it in a lesser amount of time for lesser amount of money? Absolutely. So
Hmm.
maybe we need to look at our ordinances and our codes and say, let's be smart about this and let's change what we're doing and take what we see as a success and put it to work.
Yeah,
So
I'm from Florida, and I remember after Hurricane Andrew, codes were very carefully reevaluated over the next 10, 15 years. I know Alabama, especially in the Mobile area and Baldwin County, they've worked pretty hard to look at codes as well.
and it's the big picture. It's not about, here's the deal. If I never have to put out another house fire, you think I'm going to lose any sleep over that? No. I'm just as happy if I have a fire station and a firehouse that never has to go out and save people from burning down buildings and taking. that's what we all strive for. That's what fire prevention is. We prevent the fire, and then your community is not negatively impacted. So let's think about that. Let's look at hurricane prevention. We're never going to stop the hurricane, but the effects of what that hurricane does to our community.
As we approach now this 20th anniversary again, words of wisdom for looking forward.
Oh, it's simple. I think listening to when the EMA and the authorities say, be prepared for this storm, listen to them. When the authorities out there that you're paying your tax dollars, you're paying and for their equipment and their personnel, when they go out there and they're advising you of things, they're doing it for a reason.
Right.
They are telling you that this is what they're looking at, and all of the 20 years since Katrina, what the National Hurricane Center is able to do, and what the weather forecasters are able to do is phenomenal compared to what we had then. Listen to it when they say evacuate. Think twice about building in a flood zone. If you're thinking about buying a house or you're thinking about building, don't build it in a flood zone that we're going to turn around and have to ask you to evacuate because you're going to get flooded. Be smarter than that. Just do that. And when we tell you need to evacuate, we need you to have a plan way before now. I can't tell you how many stories that I heard from Katrina. Well, our family got on the road, but they kind of got in there late, and what would have taken us 2 hours to get here took us 12 hours to get there. They didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
They didn't have enough money on them when they took off to even get a hotel room. I don't know what did they think they were going to do. They were expecting communities to open shelters, and these communities weren't prepared to open shelters.
Yeah.
And they weren't prepared to feed them. So have a plan of what you're going to do before the storm hits, and have some money. If it's nothing more than $500, $300, put some money in your pocket that you can spend. Now, not a credit card,
Right.
because if the credit card doesn't work, that cash always works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cash always works. I got friends that are overseas that do things. They'll tell you themselves, cash is king.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of stuff, and that protects you. And that's the kind of stuff that you need to be thinking about. And I was joking. I was talking about this with somebody else, and I say, make friends with somebody in another community that's far enough away that you can say, hey, is that bedroom open? Is that couch ready? And that you can say automatically, you're going 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours away. Don't just jump on the highway and say, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
And the reverse thing is that, it's just like on the coast, what we'd say is, hey, it's summer, it's blue skies. Come on down and spend a couple of days with us and enjoy our hospitality, because when you need them, you want them to say, hey, we know a storm's coming. They need to be calling you and saying, come on.
So gotta have a buddy plan, huh?
Little things like that makes a big difference,
Oh, yeah. Well said. Well, Pat, anything else from our conversation that you'd like to dwell down on, or anything to add from your experiences before and during Katrina and the learnings that you've got from that?
I guess one of the things that I have to say this is, for most people 20 years ago, Katrina hit, right? For those that lived through it, that could have been a week ago. It won't ever go away. It's always fresh. Every time I drive down the beach and I see there's a slab that a home hasn't been rebuilt, I remember whose house that was. I remember the crawfish boils we went to at that place. I remember when we swam and, we had our kids together, our kids all swam in that pool. That's not there anymore. I remember the grandparents that lived there and raised their kids who we were friends with, and then we had kids and they were all friends. None of that's there anymore. And so you got to cherish those memories, and you cherish that stuff. And the bottom line is this, maybe it's not about, it's certainly about property. It's certainly about homes. But it's about people first.
Right.
It's about your family and your friends and your loved one and your community. And, we're going through some tough times in this country. There's a lot of dissension, a lot of craziness going on. But at the end of the day, if you take care of one another, you'll always be okay.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to do. You may have different opinions, but even with those different opinions, if we could figure out a way to accept other people's opinions that may be different than ours, but you still love them and take care of them, and you don't let anything bad happen to them, then you're going to be a better person. You're going to be a better community.
And on those words, Pat, wise words to end on.
Thank you.
Thank you.